Today at the National Press Club, leading technology executive Robyn Denholm, who's the chair of the board of directors of Tesla. She's a passionate advocate for the technology industry and advancing a diversity of voices in the sector. Robyn Denholm with today's National Press Club address.
Good afternoon and welcome to the National Press Club Westpac address. My name is Emma MacDonald and I am the Canberra convener of Women in Media and the associate editor of Her Canberra. Before I introduce today's guest, I would like to acknowledge on behalf of the National Press Club and on behalf of Women in Media the passing of Queen Elizabeth II. We pay our respects to a woman for whom the notion of public service surpassed self and who embodied sacrifice and stoicism over her 70-year reign. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Robyn Denholm. Robyn is a leading global technology executive, chair of the board of directors of Tesla, operating partner of Blackbird Ventures, and chair of the Technology Council of Australia. A self-described technology optimist, Robyn will outline ways in which young Australians can seek employment opportunities in tech, as well as ways in which tech can lead us out of climate crisis. I'd like you to welcome Robyn.
Thank you, Emma, and Women in Media as well. Thank you for the invitation today. I begin today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Ngunnawal people and the Ngambri people, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. As the first National Press Club address since the passing of the Queen, I want to acknowledge Queen Elizabeth II for her role as a female leader and her unwavering dedication to public service. As our Prime Minister has noted, over the course of a remarkable 7 decades, Her Majesty was a rare and reassuring constant amidst rapid change. Through the noise and turbulence of the years, she embodied and exhibited a timeless decency and an enduring calm. I echo the condolences our nation's leaders and pay my respects today. I also add my respects to those present in the room today, including the Honourable Ed Husic, Minister for Industry and Science, and other colleagues that are here today. Today, I want to share my vision for the next generation of young Australians. I want to impart a sense of hope and optimism for the role that I believe that they can play in solving some of the greatest and most complex problems of our time. While I believe technology will be the catalyst, I know the driver of any great change is winning the hearts and minds of people we hope will innovate today towards a future that looks different to the world we live in today. The next generation of young Australians entering the workforce would be forgiven for feeling a sense of doom. A crushing pandemic robbed many young people around the world of crucial social interaction. Some missed years of schooling, witnessed deteriorating mental health, and mums and dads trying to balance work and maintaining family. But they have also seen the role and positive impact of technology in keeping people connected and society moving in the face of unprecedented upheaval and change. This generation also inherits complex societal problems and none more pressing than the urgent need to address climate change. And I believe it is our responsibility to inspire this next generation to be bold and ambitious in tackling big problems. What I know is that the thinking that got us here is not the thinking that will be needed to solve these problems. And tapping into the imagination of the next generation of digital natives is vital. I am, and have always been, a technology optimist. Outside of the machination of politics surrounding climate change, the fact is that companies and communities across the world, including right here in Australia, are deliberately working on innovative ways to decarbonise. This creates an acute opportunity for technologies that enable this transition. I believe Australia should be at the forefront of this effort, with technology driving both decarbonisation and also providing new export income. But in order for us to achieve our full potential as both a country and a global citizen, we need more people across Australia to be inspired by the opportunities that tech-based jobs offer and choosing to work in them. So why should Australians aspire to work in tech? For me, the answer is simple. Tech jobs help us solve the most complex problems of our time. Tech jobs are also the 21st century's version of a good and decent job, in the same way that manufacturing was a mainstay of Australia's economy in the 20th century. My own story highlights the power this has for a person's opportunity in life. I grew up in Sydney southwest. My parents opened a service station in the early 70s in Woolperra. On weekends and on school holidays, we all worked there. I loved science, maths and problem solving, which was celebrated in my house. This led me to accounting first in the Big Four, and then I worked in finance and operations roles in Australia's car industry. But in my mid-30s, a chance job opportunity saw me switch from cars to tech. That fateful decision meant I left a declining Australian industry and entered a fast-growing one. It took me from Sydney to Silicon Valley, and from a first job working in a service station to my current role as the chair of Tesla, the world's largest manufacturer of electric vehicles. I know my career reads like a fairy tale, but the arc of my career is a parable for the dynamism of the tech industry and its job creation potential. My career shows that life-changing impact of enabling people to move freely from one industry to the next, benefiting from riding the waves of new technology in the economy, rather than being left behind by the ebbing tides of industries in decline. It's why I am passionate about achieving the Tech Council and Australian Government's shared goal of seeing 1.2 million people in tech jobs in Australia by 2030. Tech jobs have grown at close to double the rate of average jobs growth in the economy since 2005 and are now equivalent to Australia's 7th biggest employer. In fact, there are more software engineers and developers in Australia than there are solicitors, plumbers or hairdressers. Tech jobs are amongst the best paid, most secure and most flexible jobs in the economy. According to the SEEK Salary Index, they have been significant advertised salary increases of 6% over the last year and have had an average advertised salary of $130,000. They are the most productive jobs in the economy, helping to make every industry more competitive. There are 860,000 people working in tech jobs today in Australia, but we need another 650,000 people to enter the sector by 2030 to meet the target of 1.2 million people in tech jobs. And once we allow for both the new job creation, but also people retiring and exiting the sector. This is an incredible expansion opportunity for Australians and their families across the country. The challenge is that not enough Australians know how to take advantage of this opportunity. And in particular, not enough Australians know tech jobs actually exist. And not enough Australians have the meaningful training pathways into these jobs. This is contributing to skills shortages in tech jobs across industries, limiting Australia's labour market mobility and constraining economic growth of our country. We have an economic and moral imperative to solve this. The economic imperative is that tech jobs are amongst the best jobs in the economy and they make a big contribution to solving the biggest problems. The moral imperative is that getting a more diverse array of Australians into tech jobs will help lift wages, reduce gender and other pay gaps, increase social mobility, and also improve the quality of the tech that we produce. I am heartened by the decisions that came out of the recent Job and Skills Summit. I believe they set a path to make Australia a prosperous, productive and fairer country. One initiative that I'm particularly proud of is the tech industry has committed to creating a free national virtual work experience program for top tech jobs, open to every secondary school in Australia. Ministers Amanda Richworth and Jason Clare have put their support behind it and invited state governments to do the same. Every kid in this country has the right to dream of getting a good job. But today, not enough kids understand that good jobs they could have or how to get them. Where they live, what their family and friends do, whether they are a person with a disability, all of these factors, much more than the person's potential or aptitude, determine what kids in Australia get to be when they grow up. I believe we need to give every high school kid in Australia the ability to imagine themselves working in a good job. We need to help them find out that these jobs are, while they are still in school and before they are making choices about work and further study. We need to let them try these jobs, see for themselves what they are capable of, rather than leaving their career choice to the lottery of their life circumstances. Work experience is one of the key ways people try out jobs to see if they fit. But traditional physically based work experience can exclude a lot of people, particularly people with a disability, people in regional Australia and kids from disadvantaged socioeconomic backgrounds. By creating a virtual experience platform, we can give every high school student the chance to simulate what it's like to work in top tech careers such as user design, software engineering, data science, cybersecurity and product management, and to support early stage talent pathways. We will make sure that the platform is accessible, including for people with disabilities and for those with more limited IT and internet access. This initiative can help kids around the country imagine what a good job looks like in the 21st century and to gain the confidence that they are capable of working in one, irrespective of their starting point in life. I was also heartened to see the Australian Government's Digital and Tech Skills Compact, which builds on the agreement between the Tech Council and the ACTU in the lead up to the Jobs and Skills Summit. And I thank Ministers Husic and O'Connor for championing this work. Under this compact, industry, governments, educators and unions will partner to help a broader range of Australians get into tech jobs. We will work with the government to design and launch a new modern digital apprenticeship. This will provide a high-quality vocational pathway for Australians looking for their first job or to re-skill into a new job. As an industry, we expect there to be 170,000 new entry-level jobs by 2030. We can't fill this volume of jobs nor serve the many Australians who learn best via non-university options without a high-quality vocational training pathway into these jobs. But the reality is the VET pathways into tech are not working as well as they should be for all Australians. Completions of VET qualifications have stagnated since 2018, despite the boom in tech jobs and wages, and only 40% of students that complete a VET ICT qualification are getting a better job after study. That's why this new modern digital apprenticeship model, designed in partnership with industry, educators and unions, is vital to make our VET pathways into tech fit for the 21st century. The second pillar is fixing the skilled migration system. Our biggest shortages in tech workforce today are the highly technical and experienced roles that take considerable years to develop. Even if Australia was producing enough uni and VET graduates, which we're not, we wouldn't be able to immediately fill these roles. These shortages constrain the growth of all companies, not just tech companies, and they also prevent us from hiring more Australians into entry-level jobs that need supervision, coaching and training. I view these highly skilled migrants as part of the seeds that we need to plant in order for us to grow higher skills in the technology sector overall, as learning from others with experience helps to spearhead the learning from our homegrown talent. I also welcome Ministers O'Neill and Giles' announcements to provide extra resources to clear the visa backlog and speed up processing, and to undertake a broader review of the migration system to ensure that we attract the best high-skilled, high-paid global talent to our shores. The final pillar is improving the participation of underrepresented groups in tech jobs, and in particular women. This is an issue especially close to my heart, and it is why it was important to be here with Women in Media as champions for female representation. Today, only 1 in 4 working in tech jobs in Australia are women. We must do better. As my story shows, women can excel in the technology industry, and when they do, they enjoy exceptional careers. Increasing women's workforce participation and reducing the gender pay gap should be a pressing business priority for all Australians. Getting more women into tech will help to achieve these goals. Women working in tech jobs in Australia have half the gender pay gap of other high-paying professions. Tech jobs have the highest rates of remote working in the economy and some of the greatest job security. Twice as many women in tech jobs enter after the age of 25 than before the age of 25, and I was one of them. That's why we need a dedicated program to support reskilling without lengthy university study. Increasing women's participation is a moral imperative as well as an economic one. To address the most acute challenges facing Australia, we will need the very best minds at work on these problems. Importantly, a more diverse range of views allows us to broaden the spectrum of potential solutions. It is what innovation is all about. We need women in places where decisions are being made. If we want to be a country that creates good jobs, we also have to be a country that creates new industries and companies. Australia can't, as a nation, do it all. However, there are some crucial areas of technology where we can lead the world. As a country, we are renowned for punching above our weight. In the last decade, Australia has launched globally successful tech companies from all parts of the nation, cities, regional areas, from Sydney to the Sunshine Coast, across to Perth. This includes success stories such as Atlassian, Canva, Afterpay, WiseTech, Seek, REA, Airwallex, Safety Culture, Go1, Culture Amp and Employment Hero. We have also attracted investment from some of the biggest tech companies in the world, including Google, Microsoft and AWS. What is so exciting about these companies are the common traits that they possess. These are businesses who have dreamed big from the beginning, sought to solve complex problems, have challenged the status quo, taken risks, failed, succeeded, grown and prospered. They have reimagined the way we do business. They have not shied away from creating the type of world-beating excellence which has the potential to define the next era of Australia's economic prosperity. They have succeeded over multiple decades through downturns and booms. In the past decade, Australia's tech sector has emerged as one of the nation's strongest performing sectors and an important part of the domestic economy. It is now one of the main sources of new growth and high-value companies and job creation in Australia. Overall, it contributes almost $167 billion in GDP, or 8.5% of Australia's GDP in 2020. The sector currently boasts more than 860,000 jobs, both directly in the tech industry vertical and also indirectly across all verticals and all industries. We have produced 21 of the world's 920 unicorns, those companies worth more than US $1 billion or more, a 2.3% share, which well exceeds our percentage of GDP, which is 1.6% of global GDP. These unicorns include companies specialising in business software, consumer applications and scientific innovations that promise to improve most aspects of our daily lives. Around 100 companies with valuations of $100 million or more have been founded in the past 3 decades, 67 of them since 2010. There are currently 5 segments leading the tech sector today in terms of creating large and successful players, attracting investment, growing jobs, and winning on the global arena. These are business software, biotech, medical devices, media and design, and paytech. These 5 segments are each valued at greater than $30 billion and amount to about 72% of the tech sector's total value. Australia's tech sector has demonstrated it has the right ingredients to create, fund, and grow startups locally. And some segments of the Australian tech sector are already seen as the centres of innovation on a global scale. As you might appreciate, we excel in areas in creating startups that complement our industrial strengths. Australia's share of startups in 18 segments exceeds our global share of GDP. These segments include mining tech, property tech, lending tech, and edtech, emphasising the strong connection between the broader economy and the tech sector. The world is also betting on Australia's success in 4 areas that have secured a larger share of global venture capital funding. They are quantum tech, lending tech, energy tech, and also in media and design. And this is a sign of confidence by global investors in Australia's comparative advantage in building and commercialising tech in these segments. Australia has shown its potential to create and attract global tech companies in the last 2 decades. Over the coming decades, Australia has an incredible opportunity to further strengthen its regional position in strategic tech industries. However, to do this, Australia must take 3 actions. The first is we need to set a clear vision of Australia's comparative advantage. This will align with the public and private sector efforts and drive coordinated investment in our areas of strength. I know, having been a decision maker for multinational companies on where they put their next operations and working with startups in Australia as well, the first question that's always asked is, what is the talent like? Where is it? Is it good talent? Is there engineering talent? Is there R&D talent, operational talent? That is why we've spent a huge focus on boosting tech jobs through training, retraining and skilled migration, as I've already outlined, and as well as helping tech companies attract talent through simple and competitive employee share schemes. Secondly, we need to improve the foundational policy settings that will help Australia be the best place to start and grow a tech company. It includes reforms to promote and encourage investment by local and global companies that will help our tech companies to grow and scale globally. In particular, there's considerable scope to update the R&D, or the research and development tax incentive, to better recognise that digital innovation is now the predominant R&D model in Australia, and to do more to attract investment in tech from allied nations like the United States, the UK and Japan, which can help meet both our economic and our strategic objectives. And it also includes modernising our regulatory models to be match fit for the digital economy. As an industry, we are not opposed to regulation in the tech sector, but it needs to be proportionate and it needs to be designed closely with industry to ensure and protect consumers and encourage innovation, not stifle it. Finally, we must identify and address sector-specific market failures and funding gaps for high potential areas of the tech sector. This includes developing new funding models targeting high potential areas where there is evidence of a funding gap in the private sector, such as quantum tech. We strongly endorse the Australian Government's proposed Critical Technologies Fund as a model for doing this. So now that I've outlined the opportunity in this sector and the areas where Australia could be a global leader, I'd like to tell you why it matters. It can be used, and tech can be used, to solve many of the problems that face us today. I will go into detail on how tech companies can help in the race to decarbonise, but tech can also help with the significant challenges facing our medical and healthcare systems, as well as the aged care sector and our education sector. It can also be a catalyst to revive our domestic manufacturing sector into an advanced manufacturing industry. Like most people, I want my grandkids to grow up in Australia, where they don't have to worry about things like poor air quality and water pollutant monitoring, where the natural beauty of Australia isn't destroyed by the long-term effects of climate change. I also want them to grow up with affordable electricity and with the prospect of great jobs. And I'd wager that most mums and dads out there in the country would probably feel the same way. Often the focus on technology's role, especially in the climate space, is only focused on the contribution of new technologies, that is green tech, and also the role of digitisation more generally in moving us towards a lower emissions world. But there is also a story around the industry's contribution in two other ways: climate leadership and sustainability investment. Tech companies globally have adopted some of the most ambitious net zero targets of any industry. For example, Microsoft has committed to near zero by 2025 and Google to net zero by 2030. Amazon has co-funded the Climate Pledge, which is a commitment by over 250 companies globally to reach net zero by 2040, 10 years ahead of the Paris Agreement. Right here in Australia, SEEK has committed to net zero by 2030 and Atlassian by 2040, both much more ambitious commitments than our national target of net zero by 2050. As investors, the tech sectors are real leaders too. A massive challenge we face globally is financing the energy transition to reduce emissions, and tech is playing an outsized role. Tech accounts for almost half of the volume of all power purchase agreements entered into globally in 2019 and 2020. Tech investments is also financing the commercialisation of emerging technologies to help address remaining emissions that are harder to abate and to remove carbon from the atmosphere. For example, Microsoft has established a $1 billion climate innovation fund to invest in new solutions, including carbon removal. Here at home, when VCs such as Blackbird Ventures are a lead investor in an up-and-coming startup, we also ask the company to adopt an environmental policy within a specific timeframe and set out a number of objectives relating to measuring and reducing the company's carbon footprint. There are some practical examples or practical steps as a nation we should be taking right now. At the federal election, it was very clear that most voters wanted their elected representatives to lock in energy security with sustainable, renewable and affordable electricity. One of the most important steps that we can take right now is the introduction of meaningful emission standards for our vehicles. Currently, transport accounts for around 20% of Australia's emissions, and it's rising. Increasing the number of electric vehicles on our roads will offer Australia a chance to lower emissions, and the transition to renewable energy and electric vehicles is also one of the greatest economic opportunities for Australia this century. And I believe that this transition is not only possible, but it's also in the best interests of all Australians. Unfortunately, Australia is starting from a fair way behind. Only 2% of new car sales in Australia are electric. In the UK and the EU, it's well over 10%. This month, the average fuel bill hit $100 a week for the first time ever. And the average family is spending over $5,000 a year in petrol. Our cars don't have to be this polluting or this expensive to run. Many Australians don't realise that the new petrol vehicles on offer here are much less efficient than the models available overseas. Over the last decade, most other developed countries implemented new vehicle standards requiring car makers to make improvements to the efficiency of new cars on offer. Australia didn't. As a result, our petrol bills are 30% higher and amongst the most polluting in the world. New vehicle standards don't affect existing or used cars. They mean that car makers can still sell all the same models, but over time they must introduce more efficient engines, hybrids and electric vehicles to reduce the overall pollution from their cars and ensure Australian motorists get access to the same technology as other countries. In some vehicle categories, it will take a few years for hybrid and electric options to be available. Drivers will still be able to buy new petrol and diesel cars, trucks and utes. They'll just be more efficient. Over the next 10 years, their options in each category will get to be more efficient. More efficient vehicles mean lower petrol bills and lower emissions. The good news is that we know it's possible. If you look across the ditch to New Zealand, there is an incredible effort afoot with our neighbours to deliver a new EV future. A year ago, they were in a very similar situation as Australia, but in the last year, they've gone from 2.5% of new vehicles being electric to 11%. The average emissions of their new vehicles have dropped by 14% in just 1 year. Then there's no reason why Australia can't do the same. The US, China, Japan, South Korea, Canada and the UK have all taken action. No country has more to gain from the world moving to electric vehicles than Australia. We can be a renewable energy superpower. Australia is one of the few countries in the world with all the critical minerals required for lithium-ion batteries. Electric vehicles run on lithium-ion batteries, the same batteries that firm our renewable installations. And last year, 70% of the lithium in Tesla's batteries came from Australia. Tesla spends $1 billion a year on Australian minerals, and the demand is growing rapidly. However, Australia is missing out on much of the value add from this supply chain because to date, the focus has been shipping the raw materials offshore. The question is whether or not we will take the necessary steps to move further up the value chain, including more refining and large-scale cell manufacturing. We have the know-how, we have the skills, and an abundance of mineral resources. Australia has some of the richest deposits of lithium, cobalt, zinc, copper, gold, and rare earths. And Australia should aim to do the refining, the battery cell manufacturing, and the vehicle manufacturing. We can and should do all of that. I once worked at Toyota when cars were still being made in Australia, and I believe Australia can have an even bigger car industry in the electric age, where tech skills converge with manufacturing skills to create advanced manufacturing industries. Mining, refining, battery cell manufacturing, and even vehicle manufacturing, we have the know-how, we have the skill, and an abundance of minerals resources. Today, I have outlined why I believe tech jobs are great jobs. They are well paid, flexible, and secure. Promotion is rapid and opportunities are abundant. I also believe they represent one of the greatest opportunities for Australia in the 21st century, especially in the areas where we can be a global leader. But most crucially, and why I hope to impart a sense of optimism for the next generation, is that tech jobs have the ability to solve some of the world's most critical problems. It matters for this generation, but it also gives hope to the next generation to solve these problems and improve the world for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Robyn. We are really grateful that you accepted our invitation to speak today. It's not often that we see women at the top of the corporate ladder, nor do we see women often as the public face of tech, which is a problem. Does that make it beholden on you to step into the spotlight a little bit more? And would you like to see other women come out from the shadows?
Thanks, Emma. So you may be able to tell, but this is not my fun thing to do, the most fun thing to do. Getting up and speaking on a public stage is probably in the top 10 things, most dreaded things for me to do. But anyway, but I do think it's important, which is why I'm doing it. And I'm doing it for the next generation to inspire them to get into tech. You can be good at science and maths, or you cannot be good at science and math and still have a meaningful career in technology. Technology jobs are vastly varied in different areas. If you love fashion, you can get into tech. If you love mining, you can get into tech. If you like manufacturing, tech jobs are there as well. So to me, that diversity of thought is the foundation of all great innovation. And so getting our underrepresented sectors of the economy, whether they're, or society, whether they're female, whether it's people with disabilities, Indigenous, all types of people need to come into the tech sector.
Yeah. Our next question is David Crowe from the Sydney Morning Herald and Age.
Thanks, Emma. Thank you, Robyn, for your speech. There are many questions I have on my mind now, but I've just decided to drop one because at the end of your speech you talked about battery manufacturing and even car manufacturing, and I thought there's probably nobody in Australia who's better qualified to talk about this because you know the Australian cost base. You've worked in tech and in cars, and now you understand the global cost base. And the thing that's on my mind is, yes, we have the resources to make batteries, but we also have a higher labour cost compared to other countries, and we also have high transportation costs. If we were to make batteries in Australia and export them, we've got to ship them to North Asia or US and Europe. So when you look at that cost base, are you sure that we could actually make it pay for Australia to not just make and manufacture batteries, but also even make cars again.
Yeah, as I mentioned in my prepared remarks, to me, advanced manufacturing is a very different type of manufacturing. Yes, there are people in factories, but the reality is by applying tech to the manufacturing process, you actually take some of those barriers away. So Tesla's a prime example of that. We're producing vehicles in California, which is one of the most expensive places on the planet, and so and shipping them all around the world. So to me, the fact that we don't currently have a car manufacturing industry in Australia is actually not a bad thing, because we have the skills and we can retool and get people into advanced manufacturing, which is tech and manufacturing converging.
Next question is Sarah Isom from The Australian.
Thank you so much for your address. I just wanted to ask about technology and how it relates to women. First of all, you talked about a dedicated program for reskilling without university study. I'd like to know if you think that should be led at the national level by the federal government. And secondly, we've talked a lot about how great technology is for a number of reasons, but technology-facilitated abuse is also a huge issue. How do we get huge companies and also startups to prioritise safety over profit? Does there need to be more responsibility put on these companies by government or watchdogs for the well-being of their consumers?
So in terms of getting more women into tech, I think that is something that we should be doing, as I mentioned before, in terms of both the diversity of thought is a real rock bed of innovation. And to me, encouraging people of all ethnicities, of gender, of all different persuasions, different socioeconomic groups into the tech sector is a real, I think, passion of mine, but it's also important for the industry. In terms of safety and security, I think it's absolutely important that the tech industry, but also government focus on safety and security of people in the tech area. Education is the single biggest lever there, educating the digital natives as they're coming through school. My view is that we should have a safe environment for people in the use of technology. And so I think that's a very important part. And as I said in my speech, the tech sector is not opposed to regulation. In fact, we welcome it, particularly in areas where safety and security of consumers is important.
That reskilling, though, that you were talking about, that dedicated reskilling program, particularly for women without university, is that something you imagine being led at a federal level? Well,
I think it has to be a combination of federal and state, because again, my view is that, and it's proven out by the stats, that more women join tech after the age of 25. Some have a first degree, some haven't. Some have been working for a period of time in other industries. So having a reskilling program that takes advantage of the skills that they have and brings them into the technology arena is important. And I think it needs to be a cooperative thing. I'm not into the division between the responsibilities of the states and the federal level, but my view is it needs to be collaborative, because it will help Australia overall with the skills shortage, but also make us a tech powerhouse as we move forward.
Thank you.
Next is the award-winning James Riley from Australia.
Robyn, thanks for the address, and congratulations to you and your fellow board members and Kate Pounder on the work of Tech Council. It's amazing seeing the conversation about these issues really elevated. I wanted to ask you about culture, Australian culture. Ed Husic, the new Industry Minister, has called for a review of programs focused on women in STEM. I think we've spent $100 million over 10 years and barely shifted the needle. In your speech, you also talked about building or processing minerals, building batteries, and ultimately building vehicles. That's a massive ambition. And you've also talked about the tech sector being a kind of a no-brainer for people to get into. So my question is this: culturally, what is it about Australia that we're not getting? Why aren't people seeing this as a no-brainer? Where's the low-hanging fruit?
I do think that people do get it. I do think that it takes time for people to migrate industries, as I mentioned earlier. I also think the industry has a role to play in attracting people into the industry. We're very good at 3-letter or 4-letter acronyms and talking about things that that most people do not know what we're actually talking about. And so I think we've got to change the dialogue with the Australian population to actually talk about the things that technology does as opposed to how it works. And to me, that actually will attract a lot of people into the sector, because most people use technology today. They don't need to know all of the bits and bytes in terms of how it works to be able to be very productive with it and use it in terms of the industries. We obviously also need people who can program things and that can make the technology itself. But to me, there is more than ample room for both types of technologists.
Thank you.
Robyn, do you think closing the gender pay gap in tech would be perhaps your best bit of PR towards getting women in?
I think it absolutely should be closed. So to me, there are two aspects to that. One is to get more women into the high-paying industries, and tech is one of those. So that in itself will increase the average pay. But then two, to get women into the more highly paid roles within the tech sector as well. So I think there is it is a good advertisement, and it is also something that I think a lot of students think about in terms of what is my earning capacity if I'm doing this degree, what sort of job will I get when I finish. And so I think it is important.
And maybe bosses recruiting could take that into consideration.
Absolutely.
When they're setting their pay levels. Next question is Julie Hare from the Australian Financial Review.
Thanks for your speech, Robyn. Does the recent newsworthy shift in the valuation of tech stocks, is that a short-term blip or a long-term correction in your view?
So it's an interesting question. I think the industry, as all industries go through, waves of different periods of time, both from a valuation and a macroeconomic point of view. I don't confuse valuations with the ability for Australia to actually create great jobs and great companies through this period of time. One thing I do know, through any macroeconomic downturn, if you go back even through back to the 1900s, through any macroeconomic downturn, what you see but at the technologies that are actually taking off before the downturn happens, they actually accelerate through a downturn period of time. It happened through the GFC, it happened through the dot-com era, it happened in the 80s when there were different macroeconomic downturns. So for me, investment into technologies through an economic cycle is actually a very good way of spearheading some of the technologies that we need over the next period of time.
So, but do you think it's a long-term correction, or is it just a blip?
I mean, as I said, I think all industries go through ups and downs over a period of time.
Next question is Laura Tingle.
Thanks, Robyn. Speaking of going through ups and downs, you mentioned you were in the car industry before your spectacular transition to this one. And of course, the car industry met a very long and painful death in Australia. And through that time, we were often hearing about government policies that were discouraging the car makers from staying, incentives in other countries to put manufacturing in those countries. And I'm interested in the fact that you're not really talking about particular incentives other than funding gaps and things and trying to improve the skills pool today. But I'd be interested to know what the competitive field is in other countries who are trying to also attract people into these industries and develop them. Have we sort of reached a stage where we don't have sort of massive national schemes now and tax subsidies to attract and keep these businesses? And is it just sort of fair game, or is there something that we should be thinking of beyond those areas that you're talking about?
Thanks, Laura. I think for me, we're in a unique point in history. The world is decarbonising. I don't think that's a question anymore. I think it's actually happening. And so, and Australia is in a unique position because we have the minerals here that other countries don't have. And again, the supply chains for the electric vehicle and the lithium-ion storage batteries that are key for renewable energy are being formed now. They're not being formed in 20 years' time, and they weren't being formed 20 years ago. It's now. And so to me, that's why I think it's a unique opportunity. I do think the private sector and government need to work together. I don't think that incentives are the required, because most business people will see the exponential growth that's going to happen over the next period of time in those minerals, and moving up the value chain is important for job creation, but it's also important in terms of the economics that can be yielded with that. And so that's why, from my perspective, the time to act on that is now. And we start by looking at our own emission strategies, just like the rest of the world has done. Europe has already put in emission standards. The US has already done that. Parts of Asia have done that. So my view is that we should be at the forefront of setting the pace from a move towards renewable energy, and transportation is one of those aspects.
Next question is Ben Westcott.
Hello, Ben Westcott from Bloomberg. Thank you so much for your speech today. Just on electric vehicles, Tesla's been criticised for its close relationship with China, securing advantages that other car makers haven't been able to get, and Elon Musk engaging closely with Chinese officials. Are you worried about this leading to a blowback for the Tesla in the US, which is currently trying to dissuade American companies from having those close ties to China? And are you still considering building more factories in China?
So we're building factories around the world. So we have we've just opened a factory in Berlin. We've opened another one in Texas. We've also obviously got our original factory in Fremont. We have another factory that produces batteries in Nevada. And we have a solar factory up in Buffalo in New York, as well as our China factory. So our view is the world is going to electric vehicles and to batteries that are lithium-ion based, and we need to be in all of the major markets around the world. Producing vehicles on continents is important because, again, when you're setting a supply chain for the long term, you want those the miles that those cars travel before, or the kilometres those miles travel before someone actually owns it, to be the shortest possible, and that includes shipping and sea freight, because again, all of those processes add to CO2 emissions. So from our perspective, adding manufacturing into different continents, and we've recently spoken about adding more factories over the course of the next decade, because our ambition is to actually produce 20 million vehicles by 2030. So as a reminder, we produced just under 1 million vehicles last year. So that exponential ramp is what I'm talking about, because it's not just us. The rest of the industry is also moving at a rapid pace to actually produce vehicles, and the supply chain needs to respond.
So you aren't concerned about Tesla being caught up in the strategic competition between the US and China at this stage?
As I said, for me, markets around the world are really important, and having manufacturing capability on each of the continents is important.
Thank you.
Robyn, just in case anyone's watching today and they think, I'm going to grab an electric car, and they jump online, can you explain in layperson's terms why they won't be able to get one for love or money?
Well, that's called the law of supply and demand. So the reality is there is a surge of demand around the world. We are ramping factories as quickly as possible. We have a new factory in Texas, in Austin, that's just coming online and starting to ramp, as well as one in Berlin that will add a lot of capacity over the next several months. But the reality is there is a waiting line. I'm sorry.
Sadly. Simon Gross is next from Canberra IQ.
Thanks for your talk. My question follows on a bit from young James's question here about STEM recruiting. We have a receding cohort of recruits in the STEM area. The level of, or the proportion of secondary students choosing maths is declining. Our universities don't require mathematics as a qualification to do STEM courses. All our universities have stopped using mathematics as a qualification for STEM courses. I wonder if you have any reflections on that, and if you have any knowledge of other nations who are doing better in this regard.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important. I mean, I personally like maths, so I'm a little bit biased. So math and science to me are the bedrock of how things are made. So I think they are important. Having said that, there are careers in the technology sector that don't require really deep maths knowledge, and that's one of the misnomers that we were talking about before, particularly for women who have not done.
Okay, so you're avoiding
secondary.
The question. You know, there are. I agree what you're saying. You said it in your speech, but as a basic fundamental foundation for a STEM-based workforce, we need people doing maths.
I think so. I mean, I as I said, I'm pro maths, so my view, but I'm also not of the view that everybody should be doing maths, and I think that there should be free choice in terms of whether people do subjects or not do subjects. But also, if you need it later on in terms of a career decision that you've made, that you're now changing, you should be able to get the foundational skills that you need to pursue that career. Because let's face it, not everybody knows what they want to do when they're 15 or 16 in life. I sure didn't. So I'm sure that most people, well, a lot of people don't know. Some people do, but not everybody does. And so those decisions that you make in, year 7 or year 9 or whenever you make those shouldn't be things that you can't change in the future. Because the other thing is also true. I've had 4 different career pivots in my journey. That's more of what's going to happen over time. Not everybody's going to start in the same field and end up in the same field. Changing industries, working through different career options over time, I think is the skill set that we should be encouraging in our youth. And I think they're already there. I'm hugely optimistic about the generation coming through.
So are you aware of other countries who are doing better in terms of STEM recruitment and students?
Yeah, I am. There are fabulous engineers that come out of a lot of Southeast Asian countries. There are the US is not producing as many STEM related degrees, but as it used to. But I think we have to address how things are being taught, but also the choices people make, and can they come back and do those types of subjects if they need them later.
Thank you.
Okay.
Next question is Maeve Bannister from AAP.
Thanks, Robyn. You mentioned our neighbours across the ditch lifting the number of electric vehicles that they were able to have. Are there any specific policy lessons that we could learn in Australia from New Zealand? What kind of drove that lifting of the electric vehicles?
Yeah, the single biggest thing was the emissions standards, because what happens is any manufacturer of vehicles globally has to choose the markets that they go into over time. It does cost money for a manufacturer to actually homologate a car, in other words, get it compliant with local standards. So the government setting on emission standards is important, because it signals to the market that they have to start reducing emissions even from their internal combustion engine vehicles. So I think that's the number one thing. If I had a magic wand, we would do that tomorrow. I know that the government is working on a set of submissions around that, but to me, that's the signal that all automakers around the world will be looking for Australia to set.
Thank you.
Next question is Nick Stewart from the Canberra Times.
5 times from that podium you've mentioned people with disability as a group that you're wanting to incorporate in your project. Also, I mean, it's like a little girl from the daughter of a Maltese immigrant saying that perhaps, you know, we should look at the broader society in order to recruit people who can eventually become CEOs of Telstra. Of Tesla. How is it...
I think that was chair of Tesla, but that's okay.
How is it that we actually achieve what you're wanting?
I think it's really to make the roles become real. That's why I'm so encouraged by the apprenticeship program, because I think that will help people gather the skills and then be able to apply them. And that type of learning, I think, is really apt for technology skills. And then the other is through the work experience, the virtual work experience program. Because again, let's face it, most 15, 16-year-olds have seen a lawyer on TV, maybe in Suits or something like that, but they've not seen a tech worker, maybe on Silicon Valley sitcom, but that's not a good example. So I think it's really personalising what the roles are that you do in technology and inspiring them. Thank you.
Next question is Misha Schubert.
Misha Schubert here today as the Director of the National Press Club. Thanks for your address. Just to bring all of that together, I wonder if you think about those moments where you took a big leap in your career and some of the things that put you in the path of opportunity. What would your couple of bits of best advice be to young women and girls and diverse young people watching today about what you've done in your career? Yeah, no, thank you for that. I think the biggest thing is not to be afraid to take a risk. To back yourself in that. The way I frame it is get all the advice that you can. Is this the right move? Is this the wrong move? But you have to make the decision. And when you make that decision, take the leap. And if it doesn't work, I was going to say something rude, which I shouldn't on national TV. If it doesn't work, then pick yourself up and actually dust yourself off and go for it again or do something different. I think one of the things from a cultural perspective is we've got to encourage risk more. I talked about the early companies in the startup space. Not all startups succeed, but the reality is that you can't have a successful company without some failures along the way. And innovation and technology is an absolute example of that. If you haven't failed along the way from a technology perspective, then you're actually not pushing the envelope hard enough. And so to me, applying that to careers is a really important thing. And for some reason, girls aren't as willing, and that's a broad generalisation, to take that risk. My view is if you can live with the worst outcome that possibly could happen, then take the risk and pick it up later if you don't get there. Thank you.
Thank you. In proud tradition of letting Maurice Riley have the last word, because he is the CEO of the Press Club, we will allow you to speak.
Thanks. Thanks, Emma. Tech, it's got this nerdy image, you know, and I just wonder whether how you make this sort of industry, I'm going to say more sexy, that's not the word I'm looking for, more appealing. You know, from a cultural point of view. Yeah, I mean, then I must be one of the nerdiest grandmas on the planet, but then that's a different story. So my view is, as I said before, to actually humanise what the technology does. I mean, med tech saves lives. That's what it does. You know, EVs save the environment because you're actually taking or not emitting CO2. My view is it's what the technology does as opposed to the bits and bytes that actually go into the technology that appeals to a broader range of people out there. And the reality is that technology usage is going to only increase over time. You know, as a group of developed countries, we're running out of people today. So the only way tomorrow's services are going to be able to be delivered is through productivity, and the only way you get real productivity is through technology. So to me, it's how do we talk about what technology does as opposed to the bits and bytes that make up the technology.
Thank you.
Well, it was kind of a straight answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Robyn, we're going to wrap up now, and it's my pleasure to allow you to accept this card on behalf of the National Press Club, which is lifetime membership. So well done, you made it through.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.